As you read through chapter 6 of the story this week, you'll encounter the Israelites as they're wandering through the wilderness. In fact, the title of this chapter is Wandering, and it's a great description of what's going on. The Israelites are kind of aimless at this point. They're wandering. They're grumbling to Moses. They're complaining about their hardships. And sometimes reading the Old Testament can feel like listening to a broken record because it's the same vicious cycle over and over again. There's sin, there's God's judgment, there's repentance, and there's restoration. And then it's mind-boggling how quickly they start this whole cycle all over again, going from restoration to sin once more. And they wrestle with sin and doubt and unbelief. They ask all sorts of questions. God, why did you bring us out here to die? At least in Egypt, we had food to eat. Who does this guy Moses think he is? Let's pick another leader and follow him instead. The inhabitants of the land are too big and too numerous. We look like grasshoppers compared to them. And here's what all of this boils down to, okay? The Israelites' view of God is too small. It's not just that the obstacles they face are too big, but their God is too small. Your God is too small. There's a classic book by J.B. Phillips of this same title, Your God is Too Small, and he talks about the many ways that our own views of God come up short when we emphasize certain aspects of his nature to the detriment of others. He lists a number of these false gods that we kind of craft in our minds and worship instead of the one true God. There's God as the resident policeman, guilting us and using fear to make us fall in line and to shape up and to do right. He is the ultimate enforcer of the law. There's God as the grand old man, a happy grandfather-like character with a flowing white beard on a rocking chair, old-fashioned and sentimental. He's just happy, right? He just wants to have his kids have fun, but he's certainly not the God of today. There's God as the heavenly bosom. Life is just too much to handle, so we escape from this mean and cruel world into the arms of a mother hen type figure. God becomes then our excuse to really just flee from reality. And then there's God in a box, something we can cut down to size. We can trim away the fat, the parts that we don't like, and keep the parts that we do. We can shape him to a convenient size that fits into our own little preconceptions, our denomination, or our political party's point of view. So what about you? When you think of God, when you imagine him, what image comes to mind? Because whatever it is, it says a lot about your own preconceptions. And chances are, if you're anything like the Israelites, if you're anything like me, your God is too small. Life has a way of cropping God out of the picture. Have you noticed this? When we're pressed by sin and overwhelmed by anxiety or fear or tragedy, or our vision, it tends to narrow down to a pinpoint and we can no longer see God. This is the sin of unbelief that we're talking about here, and we see it play out in stark relief with the Israelites. Belief leads to life, unbelief leads to death. But there's one key phrase in this chapter, and it's easy to miss because it's so short. But it's a simple question that God asks Moses when Moses is complaining and he's wondering, God, how in the world are you going to pull this thing off? How are you going to provide? The situation just seems impossible. But listen to Numbers 11:23. God asks Moses, is the Lord's arm too short? See, it's a rhetorical question because the answer is clear. No, the Lord's arm is not too short. His arm is big and strong enough to deliver the Israelites from Egypt. His arm is big enough to push back the Red Sea. It's big enough to provide manna in the wilderness and quail. God's arm is big enough to stretch out on a Roman cross and to take the nails, to pay the price for our sin. He's strong enough to give us peace with God. He's strong enough to secure our future and our eternity. And that means he is strong enough to carry you today. So let me ask you this simple question. Is your God too small?